I saw my son throw a box into the river and flee. When I opened it, I knew why he wanted me committed. In that moment, my world collapsed like a house of cards in a hurricane. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would. And if you, for a second, feel like this sounds familiar, I just ask that you leave a like and subscribe. It will help me keep sharing my story. My name is Carol Peterson. I'm 71 years old, and for my entire life, I believed a mother's love was unbreakable, unconditional, eternal. I lived in a small apartment in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, where every corner held memories of a family I built with tears of joy and silent sacrifices. The pale yellow living room walls, which I painted myself 20 years ago, now watched me with the sadness of mute witnesses to my destruction. It was a Tuesday afternoon when everything changed. I was wearing my navy blue cardigan, the one I always wear to the Key Food on 95th Street, its pockets full of change I'd counted 3 times before leaving the house. My worn-out black shoes echoed against the damp pavement as I returned with a tote bag full of discount vegetables and the day-old bread Mr. Rossi saved for me, knowing my Social Security check barely covered survival. The B9 bus pulled up to my usual stop, across from the small park where I used to take my grandchildren when they still wanted to spend time with me. That's when I saw him. My son Alex, my firstborn, the 45-year-old man to whom I dedicated my entire youth, getting out of his gleaming black BMW with a metal box in his hands. His eyes darted nervously from side to side, like a criminal looking for witnesses to his crime. My heart started pounding. Alex worked for an investment firm on Wall Street, always dressed in suits that cost more than 3 months of my benefits. He had amassed a considerable fortune managing portfolios for wealthy clients, playing the stock market, and speculating in crypto like Bitcoin. His bank account had more zeros than I had ever seen in my life. He was, as he often boasted, a successful businessman with an enviable net worth. But there he was, acting like a common crook. I hid behind a tree, my hands trembling as he walked toward the edge of the East River. The box glinted in the faint light of the New York dusk. Alex looked around one last time, and with a quick, desperate motion, he threw the box into the water. The sound of sinking metal mingled with the deafening beat of my heart. He got in his car and sped off down the BQE as if nothing had happened. I couldn't sleep that night. I sat in my green velvet armchair, the same one where I nursed my 3 children, where I read them fairy tales that promised happy endings, where I comforted them when they scraped their knees playing in the park. The family photos stared back at me from the shelves. Alex on his graduation day from NYU, smiling with pride as I applauded from the front row. The vacation to the Jersey Shore when we were still a united family. Christmases when my grandchildren ran through the apartment, filling it with laughter. What was in that box that my own son needed to hide in the depths of the river? For 40 years, I worked as a nursing assistant at Maimonides Medical Center. 40 years cleaning, healing, and comforting strangers while my own children grew up practically alone at home. I sold all my jewelry, including my mother's wedding ring, to pay for Alex's private university tuition. I mortgaged this apartment 3 times to cover his youthful whims, the master's degree in London, the sports car he needed to project success, the loans for his first investments in high-yield funds. I remembered his words from just a week before, spoken as he sat at my dining table eating the lasagna I'd made with the few dollars I had left after paying the electric bill. "Mom, you're slipping. You forget things. You mix up names. You leave the stove on. I think it's time for someone else to handle your finances. And you." His cold, calculating eyes had studied me like an investor examining a depreciating asset before a sell-off. "I've been talking to Kathy and Mike," he continued, referring to my other 2 children. "We're all worried. We've found a beautiful facility upstate. It has gardens, activities, people your age. You'll be well taken care of." I had felt a chill run down my spine, but I dismissed it as old age, the paranoia of an old woman seeing ghosts where there were none. "I don't need anyone to take care of me," I had replied, my voice trembling. "I'm perfectly fine here." He had smiled, that condescending smirk he'd perfected over years of dealing with millionaire clients. "Of course you are, Mom, but it's just a precaution, an insurance policy for the future." Now, in the solitude of my living room, under the flickering lamp I refused to fix because every new bulb represented one less meal. I understood it hadn't been paranoia. My mother's intuition, honed by decades of care and protection, had detected the danger looming over me like an invisible storm. At dawn, I put on my oldest rain boots, grabbed a flashlight I kept for power outages, and headed for the river. The East River flowed murky and sluggish between the concrete banks, carrying away dead leaves, crumpled papers, and the secrets of a city that never fully slept. I walked for 2 hours, scanning every rock, every branch, every pile of accumulated trash. My knees screamed in pain, my lungs fought the cold November air, but something stronger than exhaustion pushed me forward. It was the desperate need to know the truth, even if that truth would utterly destroy me. I found it half buried in the mud, near a bench where lovers used to carve their names into the weathered wood. The metal box shone faintly in the morning sun, a cursed treasure waiting for the wrong adventurer. I pulled it from the water with hands that shook more from fear than cold. It was sealed with a small padlock, but the dampness had rusted the mechanism enough for me to force it open with a rock. When I opened it, my world caved in. Documents. Hundreds of documents with my name, my signature, my photo, loan applications I had never made, contracts for cryptocurrency investments I didn't understand, invoices for million-dollar purchases at luxury stores in Aspen, Beverly Hills, even Miami, all signed by me according to these papers, all authorized by Carol Peterson, the woman who hadn't left Brooklyn in 5 years because she couldn't afford a bus ticket to Manhattan. My assets, my few savings, my Social Security benefits, all of it had been diverted to accounts I didn't recognize, investments I hadn't authorized, expenses I hadn't made. The dividends from stocks I had supposedly bought were automatically reinvested in high-risk funds. My signature appeared on documents transferring my apartment, my only real asset, to an LLC bearing the names of my 3 children. At the bottom of the box, a red folder contained the final blow. Petitions for legal conservatorship signed by Alex, Kathy, and Mike. Sworn affidavits stating that their mother had completely lost her mental faculties. Forged medical reports describing an advanced dementia I did not have. Photos of me, taken without my knowledge, where I looked confused or disoriented, carefully selected to build the narrative of an incompetent old woman. I fell to my knees in the wet mud and threw up until nothing was left in my stomach but the bitter bile of absolute betrayal. My own children, the human beings I had loved more than my own life, had been systematically robbing me for months, forging my signature, emptying my accounts, and planning to lock me away in a home to complete their perfect crime. The cry that tore from my chest sounded like the howl of a mortally wounded animal. I went home with my clothes soaked and my soul shattered, carrying that damned box as if it were the coffin of my own naivety. Every step up the stairs of my building echoed like a death sentence. My neighbors greeted me from their open doorways, but I could barely manage a nod. How could I explain to them that the woman they knew, the Carol who always had a smile and a piece of advice for everyone, had just discovered that her own children had betrayed her in the cruelest way imaginable? I sat on my kitchen floor, surrounded by the damp documents spread out like the pieces of a diabolical puzzle. Each paper told a different story of my supposed mental decline. According to these fake reports, I wandered the streets of Bay Ridge without recognizing my own neighborhood. I had supposedly tried to buy milk with Monopoly money. Those crooks had even invented a story that I once tried to cook with detergent instead of oil. All lies, all fabricated by my children to justify the unjustifiable. I then remembered all the signs I had ignored out of blind love. 6 months ago, Alex had insisted on coming with me to the Chase Bank. To keep you from making any mistakes, Mom. Like a fool, I gave him my debit card and my PIN. It's just easier if I handle it, he had said, his eyes gleaming with that ambition I had mistaken for filial concern. Kathy, my middle child, had come over one afternoon with health insurance forms. They're just routine updates, Mommy. Sign here and here. I signed without reading because trusting your children should be as natural as breathing. I now understood I had been signing authorizations for them to access my bank accounts, to apply for loans in my name, to transfer my meager savings to their personal investments. Mike, the youngest, had been the most subtle. He would come every Sunday for my lasagna, praise my cooking, and hug me with a calculated tenderness I now recognized as pure manipulation. Mom, why don't you give me a spare set of keys to your place, just in case you ever have an emergency? And I, foolish me, handed them over as if I were giving him the key to my heart. As I reviewed the documents, tears blurring my reading glasses, I found something that froze my blood: automatic transfers of my Social Security check to a joint account they had opened in my name. For 8 months, my $1,500 a month had gone directly to funding my children's luxury lifestyles. The money I needed for medicine, for food, for heat in the winter, had become fuel for their high-yield investments. Alex had used my money to buy more tech stocks. Kathy had invested in Bitcoin and other volatile cryptocurrencies. Mike had financed an import business that was generating juicy dividends. My children had gotten rich off my poverty, building their fortune on the foundations of my silent sacrifice. The phone rang like a gunshot in the deadly silence of my apartment. It was Kathy, my daughter, her sweet, concerned voice now sounding like poison mixed with honey. "Hi, Mommy, how are you? You've seemed off lately." Off. That word had become their favorite weapon to discredit any question, any doubt, any protest I might have about their strange behavior. "I'm fine, honey," I managed to reply, though my voice sounded like sandpaper. "Listen, Mom, Alex and Mike want us all to have dinner together this Sunday. We need to talk about your future. It's important." My future? As if my future belonged to them. As if I were a stock they could sell to the highest bidder. "What exactly do they want to talk about?" "You know, Mommy, the things we've been discussing. The facility, the specialized care, managing your assets. It's all for your peace of mind." Peace of mind. The most obscene phrase I had heard in 71 years of life. I hung up the phone with trembling hands and walked to the mirror in the hallway. The woman staring back at me had eyes swollen from crying, gray hair disheveled by the river wind, skin wrinkled by decades of work and worry. But she was not a senile woman. She was not an incapable old woman. She was Carol Peterson, a survivor who had raised 3 children working double shifts, who had kept this home afloat with her bare hands, who had sacrificed her dreams so they could achieve theirs. When had this nightmare begun? When had I stopped being their mother and become their victim? I remembered last Christmas, just 10 months ago. I had emptied my savings account to buy them decent gifts. For Alex, a Rolex that cost 3 months of my benefits. For Kathy, a pearl necklace from Tiffany's she'd admired in a window downtown. For Mike, a leather jacket he had tried on at Bloomingdale's while I pretended not to see the price tag. They had given me a cheap bathrobe from Target and a book of Sudoku puzzles to keep your mind sharp. Even then, they were already treating me like an old woman in mental decline. That Christmas night, after they left with their families to celebrate at expensive restaurants I could never afford, I sat alone in this apartment eating leftover turkey. I cried, but I thought I was crying from holiday melancholy. Now I understood I was crying because my heart already knew what my mind refused to accept. My children had abandoned me emotionally long before they decided to rob me. In one of the documents, I found something that shattered me completely: an appraisal of my apartment. My children had hired an appraiser to calculate how much money they would get when they committed me and sold my home. 800 square feet in Bay Ridge. $800,000. A fortune they would split 3 ways while I rotted in a nursing home paid for with my own money. They had calculated that, after deducting the facility's expenses, my net worth would provide them with enough seed capital to expand their businesses. Alex wanted to invest in tech startups. Kathy planned to open a digital marketing consultancy. Mike dreamed of a restaurant on the Upper East Side. My bones, my blood, my entire life converted into fuel for their ambitions. That morning, while New York slept, oblivious to my pain, I sat on the fire escape with a cup of cold chamomile tea in my hands. The city lights twinkled like fallen stars, and I felt like one of them. Once bright, now just a cold remnant lost in the vastness of abandonment. How had I raised 3 such perfect monsters? At what point had the unconditional love I gave them become the very tool they would use to destroy me? I remembered my mother, who died in this very apartment 15 years ago, surrounded by genuine love, holding my hand as she took her last breath. I had promised her that I would never end my days alone and abandoned like so many women of her generation. I had kept my promise to her, but my own children were determined to make me break the one I made to myself. The sunrise arrived like an implacable judge, illuminating the documents scattered across my dining table. Each paper was a different stab wound, but they all pointed to the same bleeding heart. I had two options: confront them and risk them accelerating their plans to commit me, or feign ignorance while I found a way to protect myself. I decided to be smarter than them. For the first time in 8 months, I wasn't going to make it easy for them. For the first time in my life, I was going to fight for myself. Sunday arrived like a scheduled execution. I had spent the entire week feigning normalcy while planning my strategy. I bought ingredients to make their favorite meal with the last few dollars I found hidden in the cookie jar. Money I had saved for an emergency, never knowing the emergency was my own family. I started preparing the lasagna at 6 in the morning, just as I did when they were kids running home from school with their cheeks flushed from the cold. The smell of garlic, tomato sauce, and cheese filled the apartment with a nostalgia I now knew was false. Every gesture of motherly love had become a theatrical performance for children who no longer existed. I set the table with the embroidered tablecloth my mother had given me for my wedding, a family heirloom that had survived 40 years of washing, and would now witness my final act as a naive mother. The crystal glasses, inherited from my grandmother, sparkled under the dining room light like crystallized tears. They arrived on time, as they always did when there was something important to be gained. Alex in his $2,000 suit, and that salesman's smile he used to convince clients to invest in high-risk assets. Kathy wore a cashmere coat that cost more than 6 months of my benefits, undoubtedly financed with the money they had siphoned from my accounts. Mike pulled up in his new car, a BMW that gleamed like a slap in the face to my 20-year-old Honda Civic. "Smells delicious, Mommy," Kathy said, kissing my cheek with lips that had lied so many times. "No one makes lasagna like you. That's why you're going to miss home cooking at the facility," Mike added with a laugh that tried to sound affectionate but grated on my ears like broken glass. During the first course, they maintained the charade of a loving family. They praised my meatballs, asked about my health with the feigned concern they had perfected over months. Alex even brought me a cheap bouquet of flowers from the supermarket, as if it were a real gift and not an offering to soothe his conscience. "Mom, we need to talk about something important," Alex began after the main course, wiping his mouth with a napkin as if he were about to give a speech to his company's board of directors. "It's time for you to make a responsible decision about your future," Kathy continued, in the slow, measured tone she used for her work presentations. "We've been doing some research and we found the perfect facility for you." They pulled glossy brochures from their bags, like real estate agents selling a paradise I hadn't asked for. The photos showed manicured lawns, cozy living rooms, smiling seniors playing bingo under the supervision of uniformed nurses. Everything was so clean, so organized, so much like a cemetery for the living. "Look how nice, Mommy," Kathy insisted, pointing to a picture of a communal dining hall where dozens of seniors ate in silence, supervised like inmates in a geriatric prison. "You'll have company your own age. You won't be alone like you are here." Alone. As if my loneliness were my fault and not the result of their systematic abandonment. "And the best part is, we'll handle all the paperwork," Mike added with a false generosity that turned my stomach. "We'll sell the apartment, manage the money, visit you on Sundays. You'll be treated like a queen." Like a dethroned queen, I thought, but I kept my expression neutral. "I don't understand why I have to leave my home," I finally said, my voice trembling, a tremor I no longer had to fake. "I'm fine here. I can take care of myself." The three of them exchanged knowing glances, like doctors preparing to deliver a terminal diagnosis to a patient who doesn't yet know they're doomed. "Mom, let's be realistic," Alex said with the condescending patience he reserved for his most difficult clients. "You've been very forgetful lately. Last week you left the gas stove on all night." A lie. I had never left the stove on in 70 years of my life. "And the other day we found you disoriented at the market," Kathy added. "Mrs. Miller told us you asked for the price of oranges 3 times. Another lie. Mrs. Miller had been my friend for 20 years and would never say such a thing. Besides, what will you do if you fall? If you have a medical emergency? Mike pressed. You're isolated here, without professional help. Professional. As if family love were a service that could be outsourced to strangers with degrees. At the facility, you'll have nurses 24 hours a day, Alex continued, pulling more papers from his executive briefcase. Scheduled activities, physical therapy, constant medical monitoring, and we'll be able to visit you without worrying about your safety. Their visits, those 15-minute weekly check-ins between their important engagements, when they had time to spare after spending my money on expensive restaurants and exotic vacations. I don't want to go, I said. And for the first time in months, my voice sounded firm. The silence that followed felt like a death sentence. My 3 children looked at me with the expression of exhausted patience they reserved for difficult negotiations at work. Mom, this isn't a decision you can make on your own anymore, Kathy said, with a hardness I didn't recognize in the little girl who once cried in my arms because she'd had a fight with her best friend. Your mental state no longer allows you to make important decisions. Mental state. As if loving too much were a psychiatric illness. We've consulted with doctors, Alex lied with the same ease he sold fraudulent investments to naive retirees. They all agree that you need specialized care. What doctors? I asked, though I already knew their entire argument was built on a foundation of carefully crafted lies. Geriatric specialists who have reviewed your case, Mike replied, pulling a folder from his pocket filled with documents I recognized immediately. They were the same fake reports I had found in the box from the river. My heart raced, but I kept my composure. I couldn't reveal that I knew the truth, not yet. Look, Mommy, Kathy said, adopting the motherly tone that should have been mine, not hers. We know this is hard to accept, but we're doing it out of love, for your own good. For my own good. The most dangerous phrase in the English language when it comes from the mouths of relatives with ulterior motives. Then they produced the final document. A petition for conservatorship that would strip me of all my civil rights. According to these papers, I was incapable of managing my assets, making medical decisions, or deciding where to live. My children would legally become my owners. We just need your signature here, Alex said, pointing to a line where my name was already typed out. And here? And here. My hands shook as I pretended to read documents I already knew by heart. Each clause was a different stab wound. Automatic transfer of my Social Security to an account managed by them, immediate sale of my apartment, authorization to decide my medical treatment without consulting me. And if I don't sign? I asked with an innocence I no longer felt. The atmosphere grew tense, like a violin string about to snap. Mom, please, don't make this harder for us, Kathy said in that victim's voice she had learned to use when she didn't get what she wanted. We're all worried about you. We just want to help. If you don't sign voluntarily, Alex added with a coldness that chilled my blood, we'll have to pursue other legal options. And that would be more traumatic for everyone. Threats disguised as concern. Emotional blackmail wrapped in gift paper. I picked up the pen with trembling fingers, brought the tip to the paper, and then I did something I had never done in 71 years of life. I looked my children straight in the eye and told them no. I'm not signing. The words left my mouth like bullets fired at the glass of their expectations. The silence that followed was the most deafening roar I had ever heard. The explosion was immediate. It was as if I'd triggered a time bomb that had been ticking for months, waiting for the perfect moment to detonate. What do you mean you're not signing? Alex shouted, jumping up from his chair so violently he knocked over his wine glass, staining my mother's embroidered tablecloth with a liquid red that seemed prophetic. Mom, you're in no condition to make this decision. Kathy approached me with the forced smile of a salesperson whose customer is refusing to buy garbage at a premium price. Mommy, I don't think you understand the situation. This isn't optional. It's necessary for your safety. You don't give a damn about my safety, I shot back, surprising myself with a hardness I didn't know I possessed. The only thing you care about is my assets. Mike let out a bitter laugh that sounded like grinding glass. Your assets? Are you serious? An old apartment in Bay Ridge and a pathetic Social Security check. Don't be ridiculous. Ridiculous. The word pierced me like a bullet. My youngest child, whom I had raised with infinite tenderness, was calling me ridiculous for defending the little dignity I had left. "That old apartment," I said, my voice shaking with contained rage, "is where you grew up, where I took care of you when you had a fever, where I taught you to walk, where we celebrated every birthday, every Christmas, every important moment of your lives." "Exactly," Kathy replied with a coldness that chilled me to the bone. "That's why we know you can't maintain it properly. Look at yourself, Mom. This house is falling apart just like you, just like me, my own daughter, comparing me to a dilapidated building that needed to be torn down to build something more profitable in its place. Besides," Alex continued, regaining his executive composure, "we've already invested time and money in this decision. The lawyers, the doctors, the deposit on the facility. You can't just throw it all away on a senile whim." A senile whim. As if my refusal to be stripped of my freedom was a symptom of dementia and not an act of survival. "What lawyers?" I asked, though the answer terrified me. "The best in New York," Mike answered with sinister pride. "Specialists in family law and conservatorships. Their firm handles the estates of billionaires. They know how to protect family assets from irresponsible decisions. Protect the assets. My bones, my blood, my life, turned into an investment portfolio that needed to be managed efficiently." Just then, my grandson Paul walked in, Kathy's son, a 17-year-old who had been my light in these last dark years. He was coming from soccer practice, his uniform sweaty, with a smile that reminded me of his mother back when she was still innocent. "Grandma Carol!" he shouted, running toward me with open arms. But Kathy stopped him with a sharp gesture. "Paul, go to your room. The adults are talking about important things." The boy looked at me, confused, but something in the tense atmosphere made him obey. Before he left, he leaned in and whispered in my ear, "Grandma, are you okay? You look sad." His words were a ray of sunshine in the storm. Someone, at least one person in this family, genuinely cared about my feelings. "I'm fine, sweetie," I lied, stroking his damp hair. "Go take a shower." When Paul disappeared down the hall, the mask of family civility crumbled completely. "This ends here," Alex declared with an authority I had never granted him. "Tomorrow morning, we're going to court to file the conservatorship petition, with or without your signature." "You can't do that," I protested, though my voice sounded less convincing than I'd hoped. "Of course we can," Kathy replied, pulling out her phone and showing me the screen. "We have recordings of your incoherent conversations, pictures of the apartment in disrepair, testimony from neighbors who are concerned about your erratic behavior." Testimony from neighbors. How many people had they bribed or manipulated to build their case against me? "And if you try to resist," Mike added with a smile the devil would have envied, "we have videos of you wandering around the neighborhood confused, buying the same thing 3 times in one day, talking to yourself in the park." Videos. They had been watching me, recording me, documenting every moment of vulnerability to use as a weapon against me. You've been spying on me," I murmured, feeling the world tilt beneath my feet. "We've been protecting you," Kathy corrected, with her infinite capacity to twist cruelty into charity. "Documenting your decline so we could help you when the time was right." "And that time is now," Alex decreed, packing the documents into his briefcase as if they were the death certificate of my autonomy. "Tomorrow morning we'll go to the courthouse together. You can come willingly, or we can get a court order. Your choice." They all stood up at once. A rehearsed choreography of final farewell. Kathy picked up her designer handbag, paid for with my stolen money. Mike put on the jacket I had bought him with my last savings. Alex adjusted the gold cufflinks that had belonged to my father, which I had given him on his 30th birthday. "Thanks for dinner, Mom," Kathy said, kissing my cheek with lips that tasted of betrayal. "It was delicious, as always." "Yeah, you'll miss cooking when you're in the facility," Mike added with the casual cruelty he had perfected in his years as a successful businessman. "But don't worry," Alex concluded from the doorway. "You'll have time for new hobbies. Painting classes, bingo, occupational therapy. You're going to be so entertained. Entertained. like a zoo animal given toys to keep it from going crazy in its cage. The door closed with a click that echoed like a coffin being sealed forever. I was left alone in the dining room, surrounded by dirty dishes and broken dreams. My mother's embroidered tablecloth seemed to be crying red wine, and I finally understood that the stain was irreversible, just like the damage my children had done to our family bond. But then I heard soft footsteps in the hall. Paul appeared in his pajamas, his hair still damp from the shower, an expression of concern on his face that broke my heart. "Grandma, what's going on?" Mom and my uncles left really angry. I went to him and hugged him with the desperation of a drowning woman clinging to the last life raft. His thin body trembled in my arms, and I realized he was scared, too. "Paul, my boy," I whispered into his hair, "do you think your grandma is crazy?" He pulled back and looked me straight in the eye with the brutal honesty only teenagers possess. "Of course not, Grandma. You're the sanest person I know. Mom says you forget things, but you've never forgotten my birthday, or when I have a test, or my soccer games. You always remember everything that matters to me." His words were like a balm on my open wounds. At least one person in this family still saw me as a human being worthy of respect. "Paul," I said, taking his hands in mine, "I want you to know that no matter what happens, I will always love you. Always." "Are they going to take you to a home?" he asked, with the intuition young people have for sensing family tragedies. "They're going to try," I answered, with an honesty I probably shouldn't have shared with him, but could no longer contain. "That's not right," he said with a pure indignation that reminded me why it was worth bringing children into the world. "You're not sick. You don't need anyone to take care of you." That night, after Paul left with his mother, I sat in my favorite armchair and cried until I had no tears left. But they were not tears of defeat. They were tears of war, because I had discovered something my children didn't know. I still had allies in this battle, and tomorrow, when they came for me, they would not find me as helpless as they expected. At 7 the next morning, as New York awoke under a gray sky that promised a storm, I did something I had never done in my life. I disobeyed my children. Instead of waiting meekly for them to take me to the courthouse like a lamb to the slaughter, I put on my best black suit, the one I had worn to my mother's funeral, and left the apartment with a very different destination in mind. I walked the streets of Bay Ridge with a firm stride I hadn't felt in months. Every breath of morning air tasted like stolen freedom finally being reclaimed. Shopkeepers were opening their stores, kids were running to school. Normal life went on as I set out to change the course of my own, forever. My first stop was the Chase Bank on 86th Street, where I'd had my account for 30 years. I asked to speak with the manager, a bald, middle-aged man who had known me since he was a teller, and had watched my modest income pass through month after month, year after year. "Mrs. Peterson," he greeted me with the professional courtesy he reserved for longtime clients. "How can I help you?" "I want to review every transaction on my account for the last 8 months," I told him with a firmness that surprised him. "And I want to cancel any and all authorizations I may have signed allowing third parties to access my money." His eyes widened slightly as he typed at his computer. The screen reflected numbers I knew by heart, but that he was now seeing for the first time with professional scrutiny. "Mrs. Peterson," he murmured after several minutes of uncomfortable silence, "there are some very significant transfers here that were authorized in your name. Are you sure you want to cancel these operations?" "Completely sure," I replied. "And I want a hard copy of every single transaction. All of them." While the printer spat out page after page of my documented theft, I called Paul from my old cell phone. His sleepy voice calmed me like a long-distance hug. "Grandma, are you okay? It's really early." "Paul, sweetie, I need to ask you a huge favor. Can you come meet me at the Chase on 86th Street? And bring your school backpack." "Are you in trouble, Grandma?" "I'm solving problems," I corrected. "But I need your help." Paul arrived in 20 minutes, running as if it were a medical emergency. His worried face turned to astonishment when he saw me walk out of the bank with a thick folder under my arm and an expression of determination he hadn't seen in years. "What is all that?" he asked, pointing to the documents. "This is the evidence that your mother, your uncles, and I are about to have a very different conversation than the one they're expecting." My second stop was the 68th Precinct. Paul accompanied me in silence, sensing he was witnessing a historic moment in his grandmother's life. The officer at the front desk, a young man who could have been my grandson, greeted us with the bored patience of someone who listens to minor complaints all day. "I'm here to file a report for fraud and forgery," I announced, placing the bank folder on his desk. The officer's expression changed instantly. What had started as a routine inquiry transformed into a serious case requiring the attention of specialized detectives. For 2 hours, I meticulously explained every fraudulent transaction, every forged signature, every fabricated document used to build the case for my supposed mental incompetence. The lead detective, a man in his 50s with tired but attentive eyes, took notes as he reviewed the evidence I had compiled. "Mrs. Peterson," he said finally, "what you're showing me here constitutes a very serious crime. Are you prepared to move forward with the complaint, even though the accused are your own children?" "Detective," I replied with a serenity that surprised me. "They stopped being my children some time ago. Now they are simply criminals who chose the wrong victim." Paul squeezed my hand as we left the precinct. His eyes shone with a mixture of admiration and sadness that broke my heart. "Grandma, what's going to happen to Mom? Your mother is going to have to face the consequences of her decisions," I told him gently but without hesitation. "And you are going to have to decide if you want to be part of an honest family or continue living in a lie." That afternoon, after Paul had returned to school with a promise to call me after class, I sat at a cafe near Prospect Park and did something I hadn't done in decades. I ordered a latte and a croissant without calculating if I had enough money for the rest of the week. The money that had been automatically transferred to my children's accounts had been frozen that very morning by court order. For the first time in 8 months, my full Social Security check would stay in my account. The $1,500 that had been financing their luxuries would now stay where it belonged, with me. The coffee tasted like victory. The croissant tasted like reclaimed dignity. At 6 in the evening, as the sun began to set behind the Brooklyn skyline, my phone rang with the fury of someone who has just discovered their perfect plans have crumbled like a house of cards. It was Alex, his voice seething with a rage he tried to disguise as concern. "Mom, where are you? We came to get you for the courthouse and you weren't home." "I am exactly where I need to be," I replied, not revealing my location. "You, on the other hand, should be preparing to receive a court summons." The silence on the other end of the line was so thick I could almost touch it. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that I'm no longer the helpless old woman you thought I was. I'm talking about the fact that I have a lawyer, I have evidence, and I have a criminal complaint filed against you for fraud and forgery." "Mom, you're crazy," he finally exploded, abandoning all pretense of civility. "You can't do this. We're your family." "Family doesn't steal," I replied with a calm that amazed me. "Family doesn't lie. Family doesn't try to lock up their loved ones to steal their assets." "We'll have you declared mentally incompetent," he screamed, completely losing control. "You have dementia. No judge is going to believe a crazy old woman." "Maybe not," I admitted. "But at least I'm going to fight. And if I lose, I'll go down swinging, not on my knees like you expected." I hung up the phone and turned it off completely. For the first time in months, the silence sounded like music. That night I slept in a modest hotel near the highway, paying with my own money for a room that, though small and simple, was mine by right. No one had given me this bed. No one could take it from me. No one had the power to decide if I could stay or had to leave. I took a hot shower without having to ration the water because someone else decided how much I could spend. I put on a nightgown I had chosen myself, not one someone else deemed appropriate for my age. I ate a sandwich from a vending machine that tasted like pure independence. Before I went to sleep, I called Paul from the hotel phone. "Grandma, where are you? Mom is hysterical. She says you've completely lost your mind." "Paul, my boy," I said with infinite tenderness, "do you remember what you asked me yesterday? If I thought I was crazy?" "Yes." "Well, I think for the first time in years, I'm completely sane. And tomorrow, you're going to see your grandmother do something she should have done a long time ago. What are you going to do?" "I'm going to prove to them that a 71-year-old woman can be stronger than 3 thieves who had the misfortune of choosing the wrong victim." For the first time in 8 months, I slept through the night. No nightmares. No fear. No chains. The call came at 8 o'clock on Tuesday morning, while I was having toast and jam in the small hotel coffee shop. It was my legal aid lawyer, a young woman named Anna Martinez, who had taken my case with a professional indignation that restored my faith in the justice system. "Mrs. Peterson, they've responded to the complaint. Your children want an urgent meeting with court mediation. Apparently they have a counteroffer." A counteroffer? As if my freedom were a business negotiation where they could haggle for more favorable terms for their investment portfolio. "What kind of counteroffer?" I asked, though I already suspected it would be another variation of the same theme. My money, their control. They're proposing an out-of-court settlement where you would keep the apartment, but they would manage your finances for your own good. We would avoid a trial, but you would give up your financial autonomy. "Tell them to go to hell," I replied with a calm that surprised even my lawyer, "but use more legal language." Anna laughed on the other end of the line. "I love working with clients who know what they want. The meeting is this afternoon at 4 at the family courthouse. Are you ready to see them?" "Anna," I said, "I've been preparing for this meeting for 71 years without even knowing it." I spent the morning walking through the New York that had been my home for decades, but which I now saw with different eyes. It was as if I had been living in a transparent prison for years, seeing the city through invisible bars that my own children had built around me. I stopped in front of a shop window displaying luggage. There was a small navy blue suitcase, perfect for a woman who wanted to start over somewhere no one knew her as the failed mother of 3 white-collar criminals. For the first time in decades, I allowed myself to fantasize about the possibility of disappearing, of becoming Carol Peterson, the free woman, instead of Carol Peterson, the perpetual victim. I bought the suitcase with money that was finally, truly mine. At 4 o'clock sharp, I arrived at the Kings County Family Court, a gray building that smelled of official documents and broken dreams. Anna was waiting for me at the entrance with a smile that mixed professional compassion with genuine admiration. "How are you feeling?" she asked, as we walked up the stairs to the mediation room. "Like a gladiator," I replied, surprised by the truth in my own words. They were already there when we entered. Alex was wearing his most expensive suit, the one he reserved for closing major deals with multi-millionaire clients. Kathy was wearing a conservative dress that probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check. Mike had slicked his hair back with the phony gravitas he used to impress potential investors at his business presentations. But something had changed in their faces. The arrogant self-assurance had been replaced by a nervous tension they couldn't quite hide. For the first time in months, I held the power in this relationship, and they knew it. The mediator, a stern-looking judge with 40 years of experience in family disputes, reviewed the documents with the meticulousness of someone who had seen every possible variation of human greed disguised as filial love. "Mrs. Peterson," he began, addressing me, "your children allege that your complaint is the product of mental confusion and are proposing a solution they consider beneficial for all parties." Alex leaned forward with that salesman's smile he had perfected over his years of managing wealthy clients' assets. "Mom, we've had time to reflect on all this. Perhaps we were a bit too direct in our approach. We are willing to negotiate." Negotiate. As if my dignity were a financial asset that could be traded for more favorable terms. "You can stay in your apartment," Kathy continued, her voice dripping with the sweetness I now recognized as pure poison. "We just want to make sure your finances are well managed. It's for your protection. And for our peace of mind," Mike added, with the accidental honesty that sometimes seeped through his lies. "We can't be constantly worrying that you might make reckless financial decisions." The mediator looked at me, waiting for my response. Anna gently touched my arm in a sign of support. The silence in the room was so thick I could hear my own heartbeat, a steady drum of war. "Reckless decisions," I repeated slowly, savoring each word like aged wine. "Like the reckless decision to trust you? Like the reckless decision to sacrifice my youth to pay for your education? Like the reckless decision to love you unconditionally while you were plotting to rob me?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "Mom, don't be dramatic," Alex said, but his voice had lost its earlier confidence. "No one has stolen anything from you. We were just managing your resources more efficiently. Efficiently? I stood up from my chair with an energy I hadn't felt in years. You call it efficient to use my Social Security check to fund your Bitcoin investments while I was eating hard-boiled eggs and stale bread because I had no money for anything else? Kathy turned pale. Mom, you're exaggerating. Am I exaggerating? I pulled the copies of all the bank statements from my purse. Am I exaggerating when I say you transferred my money to your personal accounts for 8 months? Am I exaggerating when I say you forged my signature to apply for loans I never authorized? I placed the documents on the table with the ceremony of someone presenting evidence at a murder trial. Am I exaggerating when I say you planned to have me committed to a nursing home so you could sell my apartment and split the money 3 ways? The mediator reviewed the documents, his expression growing more severe by the second. Anna was smiling with the satisfaction of a lawyer who knows she has a winning case. This is very serious, the judge muttered. Folks, these allegations constitute major felonies. Forgery, embezzlement, conspiracy to commit fraud. They're misunderstandings, Miguel interrupted desperately. Misinterpretations of legitimate transactions. Legitimate? I turned to him, my fury simmering for months now reaching a boil. Was it legitimate to use my money to buy tech stocks while I was skipping meals to pay the electric bill? Was it legitimate to forge medical reports saying I had dementia when you know perfectly well my mind is clearer than yours? Was it legitimate to plan my forced institutionalization so you could freely dispose of my assets? Each question was a verbal slap that made them shrink further in their seats. Mom, please, Kathy pleaded, with tears I couldn't tell were real or feigned. We're family. We can sort this out among ourselves. Family. I repeated the word as if it were a foreign concept I was learning for the first time. Do you know when you stopped being my family? The day you decided my unconditional love was a weakness you could exploit for your financial gain. I turned to the mediator with a composure that astonished me. Your Honor, there is nothing to negotiate here. I want these 3 individuals prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law for the crimes they have committed against me. I want a restraining order prohibiting them from coming near me or my home, and I want all assets they acquired with my money frozen until a court determines what portion of their current wealth is derived from stolen funds. The silence that followed was deafening. Alex shot up from his chair, knocking it over. This is insane. You're going to destroy your own family over money. I'm not the one who destroyed this family for money, I replied, unflinching. You already did that job. Kathy was openly sobbing now, but her tears no longer moved me. I had learned to distinguish between tears of genuine pain and tears of manipulation. Mike tried one last desperate gambit. What about Paul? Have you thought about Paul? You're going to ruin your grandson's life over some vengeful whim. And that's when I smiled for the first time in the entire meeting. Paul will be the only innocent victim in all of this. And for that very reason, he's going to learn a lesson you never taught him. That there are things more important than money, like dignity, like honesty, like respect for your elders. I walked toward the door with the new navy blue suitcase I had bought that morning, a symbol of a life that was finally mine to live as I pleased. See you in court, I said, without turning to look at them. And for the first time in 71 years, I left a room having the last word. 3 months later, as the February sun warmed my face through the windows of the small apartment I'd rented in Sarasota, Florida, I woke up without the knot in my stomach that had been my companion for years. For the first time since I could remember, the sunrise didn't bring with it the anxiety of facing another day of silent humiliations. The apartment was small but bright, with a view of the Gulf of Mexico that changed color with the passing hours. I had chosen Florida because nobody knew me here, because I could walk its streets without carrying the weight of a family history that had become my heaviest chain. Here, I was simply Carol, a 71-year-old woman who had decided to start over when everyone thought it was too late. The navy blue suitcase I'd bought that day in New York now rested empty in the closet, having accompanied me on the most important journey of my life, the journey back to myself. The trial had lasted 2 months. Alex, Kathy, and Mike had hired the best lawyers their stolen money could buy, but the evidence was irrefutable. The fraudulent transfers, the forged signatures, the fabricated medical reports, It all came to light with the relentless precision of justice when it finally decides to work. The sentence was a strong one: 3 years of probation for each of them, the obligation to return all the stolen money with interest, and a 5-year restraining order that forbade them from contacting me. But more important than the legal punishment was the social one: their professional reputations destroyed, their social circles evaporated, their marriages crumbling under the weight of the public scandal. Alex lost his job at the investment firm when news of his conviction reached his millionaire clients. No one wants to trust their fortune to a man who steals from his own mother. His stock market investments plummeted when he had to sell them off in a hurry to pay the legal restitution. His carefully constructed fortune vanished like smoke. Kathy had to close her marketing consultancy when her clients began canceling contracts after learning they were working with a convicted fraudster. Her dream of expanding her business with my money had turned into the nightmare of having to sell her house to pay off legal debts. Her cryptocurrency investments, financed with my stolen savings, now belonged to me by court order. Mike lost his restaurant when the banks denied him the loans necessary to keep it afloat. His credit history was destroyed by the conviction, and his investment partners fled like rats from a sinking ship. The investment funds he had managed using my money were seized and transferred back to my bank account. But the most painful thing for them wasn't the financial loss. It was discovering that their mother, the woman they had underestimated for decades, was far smarter and braver than they had ever imagined. That February morning, as I prepared my coffee in a kitchen that smelled of fresh lemons from the tree growing on my small balcony, the phone rang. It was Paul, my grandson, the only light that had survived the fire of our family. Grandma Carol. His voice sounded more mature, as if the last few months had forced him to grow up faster than any teenager should. "How are you?" "I'm well, my boy. Better than well, to be honest. I miss you," he confessed, with a vulnerability that broke and healed my heart at the same time. "And I miss you, Paul. More than words can say." He had been calling me every week since the trial, behind his mother's back. Kathy had tried to poison him against me, to convince him that his grandmother had become crazy and vengeful. But Paul was 17 and had clear eyes to see the truth the adults around him refused to acknowledge. "Mom says you're going to come back to New York soon," he continued, with poorly concealed hope. "No, sweetie. New York isn't my home anymore. My home is wherever I decide it is." But we're in New York," he protested with the simple logic of someone who still believed family was about geography instead of affection. "Paul, my love, you will always be my family, wherever you are. But your mother, your uncles, they chose to stop being my family a long time ago." The silence on the other end of the line hurt more than all the insults I had received from his parents. "Can I come visit you?" he finally asked. "During spring break. I can take a flight by myself." My heart filled with a joy I hadn't felt in years. "Of course you can come. I'll show you Sarasota. We'll walk on the beach. I'll cook all your favorite foods. And you'll tell me the whole truth," he added, with the premature wisdom of a child who has seen too much. "Everything Mom and my uncles don't want me to know. I'll tell you my side of the truth," I promised. "And when you're older, you can decide for yourself what to believe." After hanging up, I sat on the balcony with my coffee and my morning book. I had rediscovered the pleasure of reading without interruption, of making decisions about how to spend my time without consulting anyone, of buying flowers for my home simply because they made me happy. The money I had legally recovered had given me a financial security I had never known. I wasn't rich, but I wasn't poor either. For the first time in my life, I could afford small luxuries without feeling guilty. A dinner at a restaurant with a view of the water, new clothes I bought for pleasure instead of necessity, books I could buy without calculating if I had money left for other things. But more important than financial security was peace of mind. I no longer woke up wondering what new humiliation awaited me that day. I no longer lived in a state of constant alert, waiting for the next attack on my dignity. I no longer had to pretend everything was fine when my world was silently falling apart. I had started taking painting classes at the local community center. My hands, which had spent decades cleaning hospitals and caring for others, now created colors on canvases that no one judged but me. My watercolors were timid at first, as if afraid to take up too much space. but gradually they had begun to expand with more confidence. I had also started walking on the beach every morning. The Gulf of Mexico reminded me that there were bigger worlds than the small universe of pain I had lived in for years. Each wave that broke on the sand carried away a little more of the bitterness I had accumulated, replacing it with something I had forgotten existed: hope. The other residents of my building knew me as the lady in 4B who's always smiling. They knew nothing about trials or thieving children or recovered fortunes. To them, I was simply Carol, an older woman who had decided to spend her golden years by the sea, reading on her balcony and watering her plants with maternal devotion. One afternoon, while planting geraniums in new pots I'd bought with money that was finally, rightfully mine, I realized something that filled me with awe. I was happy, not content, not resigned, not simply relieved. I was genuinely happy. Happiness tasted like the cherry tomatoes growing on my balcony, smelled like the sea salt wafting in through the open windows, and sounded like the seagulls that woke me each morning like a chorus of freedom. It had the texture of clean sheets no one else had used, the golden color of sunsets I could watch without rush, without obligations, without guilt. That night, as I ate a simple omelet I had made just for myself, I received a certified letter from the court in New York. It was the final notification. The legal process was officially over. My children had met all the financial obligations imposed by the sentence. Legally, I was free of any connection to them, but I no longer needed official documents to feel free. Freedom had arrived much earlier, on the day I decided to stop being a victim and become the protagonist of my own life. That night, I slept with the windows open, letting the sea breeze caress my face as I dreamed of the future instead of mourning the past. For the first time in 71 years, my dreams were my own. A year after that Sunday that changed my life forever, I woke up in my Sarasota apartment to the sound of seagulls announcing another day that belonged entirely to me. It was a Tuesday in March, and for the first time in decades, March didn't bring the painful memory of Alex's birthday, which I used to celebrate with gifts I couldn't afford for a son who didn't appreciate them. I got up without rushing, made my coffee as I had every morning for months, and sat on the balcony to watch a sunrise that painted the Gulf with colors my brushes had not yet managed to capture. My watercolor from the previous week rested on the easel, drying in the sun. It was a seascape I had painted from memory, but it held more truth than any photograph. Life had taught me that freedom isn't the absence of problems, but the ability to choose which problems are worth having. And the problems I had now, whether the balcony plants needed more water, whether I should buy tomatoes or peppers at the market, whether I wanted to read on the beach or at home, were delightful problems compared to the ones I had endured for years. The phone rang as I was watering my geraniums. It was Paul, as it was every Tuesday morning, religiously keeping our weekly phone appointment. "Good morning, most beautiful grandma in the world." He greeted me with a cheerfulness that reminded me why this fight had been worth it. "Good morning, smartest grandson in the universe," I replied, following our morning ritual. "How's my favorite guy?" Nervous but excited. "I get my college admission results tomorrow." Paul had decided to study law. When he told me 6 months ago, I couldn't help but smile, imagining that perhaps my story had planted in him the seed of justice, the desire to protect the vulnerable from those who would abuse their trust. "You're going to get in everywhere," I told him with the absolute certainty only a grandmother who knows her grandson's intelligence and integrity can have. "And if you decide to specialize in family law, I promise to be your first client." He laughed, a clean laugh that was music to my ears. "You already have a lawyer, Grandma. Besides, Anna says you're the bravest client she's had in her 20-year career." Anna Martinez had become more than my lawyer. She was my friend, the woman who had seen my strength when I didn't yet know I had it. We had lunch once a month when she came to Florida to visit her own mother, and she always reminded me that my case had changed her perspective on what older women could achieve when they decided to fight for themselves. "Paul," I said, adopting the serious tone I reserved for important conversations, "is your mother still asking about you?" "Yeah. She says she misses you, that this has all gone too far, that family should be together." The silence that followed was comfortable, not tense. We had learned to navigate these topics without reopening old wounds. And what do you tell her? I tell her that family is built on respect and love, not blackmail and lies. That if she wants to be your family again, she should start by truly apologizing. Not for the money, but for hurting you. My 18-year-old grandson understood concepts that his parents, with all their higher education and business experience, seemed incapable of grasping. I also tell her, Paul continued, with a maturity that made my heart ache with pride, that she can't speak ill of you in front of me, that if she wants us to keep having a relationship, she has to respect that you are the most important person in my life. The tears that rolled down my cheeks were of pure happiness. I had raised thieving children, but I had helped shape a man of integrity. After hanging up, I showered and got dressed for my favorite Tuesday ritual, the downtown farmers market. Walking among the stalls of fruits and vegetables, choosing ingredients for meals I would prepare just for myself, chatting with vendors who knew me as Carol, the nice lady from the apartment near the beach. At Mr. Garcia's stall, where I bought my tomatoes every week, a surprise was waiting for me. A special shipment of Florida oranges had arrived, the first of the season. "For you, Miss Carol," Mr. Garcia said with an old-fashioned gallantry that made me feel like a queen. "The best oranges. Sweet as your smile. I bought a pound more than I needed, because I could afford it, because I wanted to, and because no one was going to question whether it was a responsible expense or not." On the way home, I stopped at the bank where I had opened my account when I first arrived. The manager, a woman my age who had become a confidant and almost a friend, greeted me with her professional smile that hid genuine warmth. "Mrs. Peterson, what a surprise. Is everything all right with your investments?" With the money recovered from my children, I had decided to do something I never thought I could. Invest wisely for my future. Nothing risky, nothing speculative. Conservative funds, treasury bonds, some blue-chip stocks that generated modest but steady dividends. Everything is perfect, thank you. I just wanted to ask about making a transfer. Any special expense? I want to send money for my grandson's college tuition. Enough so he won't have to worry about working while he studies. It was the first time in my life I could give a gift of money without compromising my own survival. The feeling was intoxicating. That afternoon, as I prepared shrimp scampi just for myself, because I could, because I wanted to, because no one was going to make me feel guilty for wasting food on a single person, I reflected on the journey I had taken. Exactly 1 year ago, I was sitting on my kitchen floor in Brooklyn, surrounded by damp documents revealing the deepest betrayal I had ever experienced. Today, I was preparing fresh shrimp in a kitchen that smelled of garlic and freedom, in a home no one could take from me, with money no one had stolen. The contrast was so extreme that I sometimes wondered if I was dreaming, but the dream had too many sensory details to be false. The salty taste of the sea breeze, the aroma of sautéed garlic, the sound of my own laughter when I caught myself singing while I cooked. At sunset, when the light turned my apartment into a cathedral of gold, I took out the photo album I had started since arriving in Florida. There were no family photos. That era was over for me. But photographs of my new life. The sunrise from my balcony, my first watercolors, the view from my window in different seasons, Paul smiling during his spring break visit. Each image told a story of resurrection, of a woman who had learned that it's never too late to start over, that dignity has no expiration date, that self-love is not selfishness, but survival. That night, before sleeping, I wrote in the journal I had started keeping since my arrival. Today marks the 1-year anniversary of my new life. If I could talk to the Carol from 12 months ago, that woman crying on her kitchen floor, believing her world was over, I would tell her to be calm. That the end of one story can be the beginning of a better one. That losing a false family is sometimes the price you have to pay to find yourself. I would tell her that the deepest betrayal can become the most unexpected gift if you have the courage to not remain the victim. I would tell her that at 71, you can learn to be happy, to live without fear, to make decisions for yourself for the first time in decades. I closed the journal and looked out the window at the sea stretching infinitely under the full moon. Tomorrow would be another day of my own, full of decisions only I would make, moments that would matter only to me. and a peace I had built with my own hands on the ruins of what I once thought was family love. I fell asleep smiling, knowing that this story had the ending it had always deserved. Me, free, dignified, and finally home. Have you ever experienced a situation like this? Or do you know someone who has? Tell me in the comments. If this story touched your heart, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel so this message can reach someone who needs to hear it.